The shy secretary confessed in the elevator, and the millionaire CEO heard everything and canceled all meetings. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to the main character. The elevator door slid open with a soft chime on the 42nd floor, the sound echoing faintly through the glass and steel corridor of Caldwell Dynamics. And Lily Parker stepped inside, as if she were slipping into a quiet confessional no one else could hear. Clutching her slim notebook to her chest, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the brushed metal doors as they closed, sealing her away from the noise of ringing phones and hurried footsteps outside, because for Lily, the elevator had become the only place where she could breathe without feeling watched. She had been Ethan Caldwell's executive secretary for nearly 2 years, close enough to hear his voice through glass walls, close enough to memorize the rhythm of his day down to the minute, yet invisible enough that no one ever asked how she was doing. And certainly no one ever guessed what it cost her to sit 10 feet from one of the most powerful men in the building while pretending her heart didn't react every time he said her name. The elevator began its slow descent, the digital numbers ticking down in steady red increments, and Lily let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, her reflection staring back at her in the mirrored panel, pale, composed, professional, the kind of woman people described as quiet but efficient, never important, never noticed. She glanced at the ceiling, then back at herself, and before she could stop it, words slipped out, barely louder than a whisper, the kind of honesty that only came when she believed she was truly alone, saying that she knew it was unprofessional, that she knew she should never feel this way, that she was supposed to be grateful just to have the job, the benefits, the steady paycheck. Yet every morning when she organized Ethan Caldwell's meetings, every time she adjusted his calendar or caught his tired reflection late at night, something in her chest tightened, something she had never planned, never chosen, never confessed to another living soul. She told the empty elevator that she admired the way he listened more than he spoke, the way he protected his employees even when the board pushed back, the way he looked so composed in public but so human when he thought no one was watching. And she admitted, voice trembling now, that she had drafted her resignation email 3 times because she was afraid of becoming someone who crossed lines just by feeling too much. The elevator hummed softly, steady and indifferent, and Lily pressed her lips together, embarrassed by her own honesty, shaking her head as if the steel walls could judge her, whispering that none of it mattered because men like him never noticed women like her, because secretaries were replaceable, feelings were liabilities, and dreams were things you folded up neatly and tucked away like paper you didn't need anymore. She didn't know that in the far corner of the elevator, just outside her line of sight, Ethan Caldwell stood perfectly still, having stepped in moments earlier while checking a message, choosing silence when he realized she hadn't noticed him, and now hearing every word she thought would vanish into thin air. The numbers continued to fall, the space between floors stretching longer than usual, and Lily straightened her posture, smoothing her skirt, rehearsing her neutral expression for when the doors opened, unaware that the man who controlled the entire building had just heard the most honest confession of his life, and that nothing about either of their days was going to proceed as scheduled. The doors opened on the executive floor, and Lily Parker stepped out as if nothing had happened, her heels clicking softly against polished stone while her heart raced in a way that made her wonder if anyone could hear it. And she told herself, as she always did, that she was overreacting, that private thoughts spoken to empty air did not matter, that this building had swallowed far bigger secrets than hers. She returned to her desk, aligned her notebook precisely with the edge, opened her calendar software, and resumed the careful choreography of her day, answering calls with a steady voice, confirming appointments down to the minute, reminding herself that professionalism was a kind of armor she had learned to wear well. Lily had grown up believing that stability was something you earned by staying quiet, by not asking for more than what was offered, and the job at Caldwell Dynamics was proof that discipline paid off, because it covered her rent, her health insurance, and the small, orderly life she had built for herself in a modest one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from downtown. She knew exactly how many miles she walked each day between the train station and the office, how many dollars she saved by packing lunch instead of buying it, and how much effort it took to keep her feelings neatly contained behind polite smiles and perfectly drafted emails. Loving her boss, even silently, was not part of the plan, and that was why it terrified her, because it threatened the balance she had worked so hard to maintain. From her desk, she could see the glass walls of Ethan Caldwell's office, the way light caught on the clean lines of the space, the way people straightened unconsciously when they entered, and she reminded herself that he belonged to a different world, one defined by quarterly reports, board expectations, and decisions that moved markets, not hearts. Lily was painfully aware of the rules, both written and unspoken, the ones that said secretaries did not cross boundaries, did not imagine themselves as anything more than support, did not mistake kindness for invitation, and she had obeyed those rules so carefully that no one had ever questioned her place. She did not know that behind the glass, Ethan sat motionless at his desk, his schedule open in front of him, meetings stacked from morning until evening, yet his mind fixed on a voice he could not unhear, a confession that had reached him not through strategy or intent, but through chance. He stared at the list of obligations that usually grounded him, investor calls, department briefings, a lunch he had not wanted to attend, and for the first time in years, none of it seemed urgent. He thought about how easily Lily blended into the background, how he relied on her without truly seeing her, and how dangerous it was to ignore something real just because it arrived unexpectedly. The clock ticked forward, reminders chimed softly, and outside his office, Lily continued working, unaware that her quiet life had brushed against a turning point. She focused on the small things she could control, the formatting of a document, the clarity of a memo, the calm tone of her voice, telling herself that feelings were temporary and routines were safe, that whatever she had whispered into the elevator had already faded into the hum of the building. Yet beneath that calm, there was a familiar ache, the fear that one unguarded moment could cost her everything she had built, and she promised herself, as she always did, that she would be careful, that she would not hope, that she would not forget her place. Even as the morning moved on and the weight of what she did not know began to quietly reshape the day, Lily noticed the first sign that something was off just before 10 in the morning, when the familiar rhythm of the office shifted in a way she could not immediately explain, like a clock that had skipped a beat, because instead of the usual steady stream of assistants requesting approvals and executives asking for last-minute changes, there was an unusual quiet spreading across the floor, a hush that made the air feel heavier. She refreshed Ethan Caldwell's calendar out of habit, expecting to see the same tightly packed schedule she had memorized, but her screen paused for a fraction of a second longer than usual, and when it loaded, she froze, because the afternoon block was suddenly blank, wide open stretches of white where meetings had been moments before. Lily blinked, certain it had to be a system error, and opened her notebook, the one she carried everywhere, the one with neat handwriting and color-coded tabs that kept her grounded, flipping back through pages filled with careful notes, reminders, and to-do lists that represented control, order, and safety. She checked her sent emails, her drafts, including the resignation letter she had written late one night and never sent, the words still there, polite and restrained, thanking the company for the opportunity, promising a smooth transition, never once admitting the truth of why she had considered leaving. Around her, co-workers exchanged glances, whispering softly, wondering why the CEO had closed his door, why calls were being postponed, why the day felt like it was holding its breath. Lily told herself that none of this had anything to do with her, that companies changed schedules all the time, that executives canceled meetings for reasons that had nothing to do with shy secretaries and whispered confessions. Yet her stomach tightened as she replayed the morning in her mind, the elevator, the sound of her own voice, the way the space had felt too still. From inside his office, Ethan sat with his hands folded on the desk, staring at the same calendar Lily had seen, only from the other side. Each canceled meeting a deliberate choice, each cleared hour an act of control he rarely exercised for personal reasons. He thought about the notebook Lily always carried, the one he had seen her clutch that morning, about the careful way she managed his time while neglecting her own needs, and about how easily people like her were overlooked because they never demanded attention. He had built his career on decisive action, on recognizing patterns others missed, and he could not ignore the pattern forming now, the connection between a voice in an elevator and the sudden realization that something important had been unfolding quietly right in front of him. Outside, Lily straightened a stack of papers that did not need straightening, adjusted her chair, and focused on small tasks to keep her hands busy, because waiting without knowing was worse than being busy with bad news. She glanced at the glass wall again, at the closed door, at the faint outline of Ethan's figure beyond it, and she felt the weight of all the things she had never said pressing against her ribs. The office clock ticked forward, minute by minute, and with each passing second, the planted seeds of that morning, the confession, the silence, the unseen listener, began to take root, quietly setting the stage for a moment that would demand honesty from both of them, whether they were ready for it or not. The message reached Lily's screen just after 11, a simple request asking her to come into Ethan Caldwell's office. And although the words were neutral, polite even, her pulse jumped in a way she could not control, because requests from him were usually routed through schedules and bullet points, not direct summons. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked the short distance that suddenly felt much longer, each step measured, each breath careful, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong, that she was good at her job, that professionalism was still her shield. Inside the office, Ethan rose from his chair when she entered, a small gesture that caught her off guard, and he gestured toward the chair across from his desk, waiting until she sat before he spoke. His voice was calm, controlled, the same voice that led meetings and reassured investors, yet there was an unfamiliar softness beneath it, a pause between sentences that suggested he was choosing his words more carefully than usual. He thanked her for adjusting the schedule so quickly, acknowledged the efficiency she brought to the office, and Lily nodded, hands folded tightly in her lap, wondering why her heart was beating so fast over a conversation that sounded, on the surface, like routine. Ethan glanced briefly at the window, then back at her, and said that sometimes clarity required silence, that a packed calendar could hide things worth paying attention to, and Lily listened, unsure where he was going, afraid to interrupt. He mentioned the elevator in passing, the way the building felt smaller in quiet moments, and Lily's breath caught so sharply she had to focus on keeping her expression neutral, because the word echoed louder in her mind than it had any right to. Ethan watched her closely then, not as a CEO evaluating an employee, but as a man noticing the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes dropped for half a second, the way her fingers tightened together. He did not accuse or confront. He simply said that he had been there that morning, that he had heard more than she realized, and the room seemed to tilt as Lily processed the meaning of his words, her carefully constructed calm cracking just enough to let fear slip through. She apologized immediately, words tumbling over each other, assuring him it was unprofessional, that she never intended him to hear, that she understood boundaries and would accept any decision he made, including termination, because responsibility mattered more than comfort. Ethan raised a hand gently, stopping her without touching her, and said that he did not bring her here to punish honesty, especially not the kind that came without expectation. He admitted that hearing her had forced him to confront his own assumptions about the people he relied on, about how easy it was to overlook quiet strength, and about how leadership was not just about authority, but awareness. Lily looked up then, meeting his eyes for the first time without the buffer of a desk or a task between them. And in that moment, the imbalance of power felt painfully clear, yet something else was present too, a respect she had not anticipated. Ethan told her that nothing would change without her consent, that her position was secure, and that he wanted to give her space to decide what she needed, not what she thought was expected of her. As she left the office, her thoughts a blur of relief and uncertainty, Ethan returned to his desk, aware that the quiet he had created was no longer just about canceled meetings, but about making room for truth, and that the choice to listen, once made, could not be undone. The rest of the day unfolded with a strange, suspended quality for Lily, as if the office had slipped into an alternate rhythm where familiar routines no longer anchored her the way they once had, and she returned to her desk carrying the weight of Ethan Caldwell's words with every breath. She answered emails, confirmed rescheduled calls, and reassured department heads with practiced calm. Yet beneath the surface her thoughts kept circling back to the moment in his office when he had not acted like a distant executive, but like a man who had listened and chosen restraint instead of authority. Himself thinking not about market trends or quarterly forecasts, but about the quiet discipline it took for someone like Lily to exist unnoticed, to carry responsibility without recognition, and to feel deeply without demanding space for those feelings. He reviewed documents without absorbing them, his attention pulled instead toward the realization that leadership often insulated him from the emotional realities of the people who kept his world running, and that hearing Lily's confession had pierced that insulation in a way no performance review ever had. Late in the afternoon, he stepped out of his office unexpectedly, asking Lily if she could walk with him to review a few items, a request delivered casually, yet charged with a new awareness that neither of them could ignore. As they moved down the corridor, their conversation stayed strictly professional, discussing timelines and priorities, but there was an undercurrent of mutual caution, a shared understanding that every word now carried more weight than before. Lily noticed how he matched his pace to hers, how he listened without interrupting, small details that made her question the narrative she had built about men like him being unreachable by design. When they returned to the executive floor, Ethan thanked her again, this time not just for her work, but for her honesty, and Lily nodded, her response measured, choosing professionalism over impulse, because respect, she realized, was not about ignoring feelings, but about handling them with care. As the office lights dimmed and the workday drew to a close, both of them carried forward with the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted, that a line had been acknowledged rather than crossed, and that the space between silence and truth, once opened, could not simply be sealed again. The following morning arrived with a quiet resolve that Lily had not felt before, the city still waking as she stood on the train platform clutching her notebook, watching commuters shuffle past with their coffee cups and headphones, and she realized that for the first time in months, she was not rehearsing ways to make herself smaller. The events of the previous day had not erased her caution, but they had introduced something unfamiliar, a sense that she was being seen not as a role, but as a person whose presence mattered. At the office, the atmosphere had settled into a new normal, the rumors fading as quickly as they had started, replaced by the steady hum of work. Yet Lily could sense a subtle difference in how Ethan Caldwell interacted with her, not closer, not distant, but more deliberate. He asked for her input on scheduling priorities, listened when she explained why certain meetings could wait, and acknowledged her reasoning without the usual rush to move on, small shifts that spoke louder than grand gestures. Lily responded with the same professionalism she had always maintained, yet she found herself less tense, her shoulders no longer perpetually braced for dismissal, because respect, once offered, had a way of easing the defenses she had relied on for so long. During a brief pause in the afternoon, she stepped into the break room, poured herself a glass of water, and caught her reflection in the window, noticing how tired she had looked before, how tightly she had been holding herself together, and she wondered when she had learned that silence was safer than honesty. Across the hall, Ethan reviewed proposals with a renewed focus, aware that clarity did not come from ignoring complexity, but from acknowledging it, and he recognized that the space he had given Lily was not an indulgence, but a responsibility, one that required consistency rather than impulse. He thought about the countless talented people who had passed through his company unnoticed because they did not demand attention, and how easily leadership could become a barrier instead of a bridge. When he asked Lily to join him later to review long-term planning, he framed it as collaboration rather than command, careful to ensure that the choice remained hers, and she agreed, aware of the significance without allowing it to inflate into expectation. As they sat together over spreadsheets and timelines, their conversation remained grounded, focused on work, yet infused with an ease that had not existed before, the kind that came from mutual respect rather than familiarity. Lily found herself speaking with more confidence, her ideas clear and measured, and Ethan listened, recognizing that trust was built not through grand declarations, but through consistent actions that honored boundaries. As the day drew to a close, Lily packed her bag with a sense of quiet accomplishment, aware that whatever lay ahead would require patience and care, and Ethan watched the office empty with the understanding that leadership, like connection, was not about control, but about creating space where others could stand fully in their own strength. Neither of them named what was changing, yet both understood that something important was unfolding, something that could not be rushed, and that the path forward would be defined not by power or confession, but by the choices they made when no one else was watching. The tension that Lily had been trying to keep at bay finally surfaced late that week, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet moment that carried more weight than raised voices ever could, when an unexpected email from Human Resources appeared in her inbox requesting a routine review of executive support roles, a standard process on paper that felt anything but neutral in context. She read the message twice, her chest tightening as old instincts resurfaced, the instinct to prepare for loss, to assume that the safest path was retreat, and she closed her eyes briefly, remembering the resignation letter still saved in her drafts. Lily knew that proximity to power came with scrutiny, and she refused to let anyone suggest that her work, or any opportunity she might receive, was the result of anything other than merit. She walked to Ethan Caldwell's office with steady steps, the decision forming clearly in her mind before she even knocked, because whatever respect had grown between them would mean nothing if it compromised her integrity. Ethan looked up as she entered, immediately sensing the shift in her demeanor, and she handed him a printed copy of the email, explaining calmly that she wanted to address it directly, that she did not want special consideration, reassignment, or assumptions that could undermine the credibility she had worked years to build. Her voice did not waver as she told him that if her presence created complications, she was prepared to step back, even to leave, because she would not become a liability to him or the company. Ethan listened without interrupting, the seriousness of her resolve striking him more forcefully than any confession could, and when she finished, he repeated something she had said in the elevator, word for word, not as a revelation this time, but as a reminder of why he had chosen to listen in the first place, because she valued professionalism over comfort, honesty over convenience. He told her that leadership meant protecting fairness as much as people, and that he would not allow speculation to define her contributions, yet he also acknowledged her right to choose distance if that was what she needed to feel secure. Lily felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief, sadness, pride, as she realized that caring did not have to mean entanglement, and that respect sometimes required stepping apart rather than closer. She asked for time, not as an avoidance, but as a boundary, and Ethan agreed without hesitation, understanding that trust was proven in moments when control was surrendered. As Lily returned to her desk, the familiar environment felt altered once more, not by whispered rumors or power plays, but by the clarity of a choice made openly, and she focused on her work with renewed determination, knowing that whatever happened next would be grounded in truth. Ethan watched the office settle back into its rhythm, aware that the quiet courage Lily had shown forced him to confront his own responsibilities differently, and that the space between them, though painful, was also honest. In that space, both of them faced a turning point, one where feelings could no longer remain hidden, yet could not be allowed to dictate the terms, and the outcome would depend not on chance, but on the strength of the values they were unwilling to compromise. The days that followed were marked by intention rather than avoidance, and Lily felt the shift most clearly in the way decisions were no longer implied but stated, choices no longer assumed but offered, beginning with an unexpected announcement from leadership outlining a transparent restructuring of executive support roles across the company, complete with clear criteria, timelines, and oversight. The memo was thorough, careful, unmistakably fair, and as Lily read it, she understood that this was not a quiet favor, but a public commitment to principle, one that left no room for speculation. Ethan had taken the responsibility she demanded and turned it into action that protected not only her, but everyone in similar positions, and that realization grounded her in a way she had not anticipated. When Ethan asked to speak with her again, it was not in his office, but in a neutral conference room with glass walls, the setting itself reinforcing the boundaries they both respected. He told her plainly that the changes were necessary regardless of their personal circumstances, that fairness could not be selective, and that he hoped she understood the decision as an affirmation of her professionalism, not a complication caused by it. Lily listened, the weight she had been carrying easing as she recognized the care behind the choice. And she replied with equal clarity, thanking him not for protection, but for integrity. It was in that balanced exchange, free of apology or implication, that something deeper settled between them, a mutual understanding that neither power nor fear would dictate their next steps. Later that evening, long after most of the office had emptied, Lily gathered her things and paused by the elevator, the familiar space now charged with memory, yet no longer heavy with secrecy. Ethan joined her a moment later, not by coincidence, but by design, and they stood side by side in silence as the doors closed, the soft hum filling the space where her whispered confession once lived. He did not speak first, and she appreciated that restraint, because it gave her room to choose her words without pressure. Lily said that she was not ready to define anything beyond respect and honesty, that she needed time to trust that balance could exist without cost, and Ethan nodded, telling her that patience was not a concession, but a commitment he was willing to make. When the doors opened, he did not reach for her hand or ask for more than she offered. He simply said that when and if she wanted to talk beyond schedules and reports, he would listen, not as a CEO, but as a man accountable for his influence. Lily stepped out into the lobby, her reflection passing briefly through the glass, and she realized that the grand gesture she had feared did not arrive in the form of dramatic declarations, but in the quiet consistency of someone aligning words with actions. As they parted ways for the night, both aware that something meaningful had been preserved rather than rushed, the space between them felt less like distance and more like possibility, a choice made not in secrecy, but in the open, where respect had room to grow. Time did not rush them after that, and Lily came to understand that what had begun in an elevator ended not with spectacle, but with steadiness, the kind that proved itself through ordinary days handled with care. Weeks passed, the restructuring completed smoothly, and Lily's role evolved in a way that reflected her strengths openly, her responsibilities clarified, her contributions recognized without whispered explanations or raised eyebrows. She moved through the office with a confidence that surprised even her, no longer bracing for judgment, no longer rehearsing exits, because she knew where she stood. Ethan Caldwell, in turn, found that the clarity he had insisted on reshaped more than a single situation. It shifted the culture he led, reminding him that authority carried weight only when paired with accountability. One evening, after a long but satisfying day, Lily lingered by her desk organizing notes she no longer needed to hide behind, when Ethan approached and asked if she would like to get coffee, not as an executive directive, not as an assumption, but as an invitation offered outside of office hours, beyond the glass walls that once defined their roles. Lily considered the question carefully, measuring it against the boundaries she had learned to trust, and then she nodded, because this choice felt different, grounded in mutual respect rather than imbalance. They walked to a small cafe a few blocks away, the city lights reflecting off windows as traffic hummed past, and they talked about ordinary things, books they had read, places they hoped to visit, the quiet satisfaction of building something that mattered. And Lily realized that liking someone did not require surrendering herself. Ethan listened as he always had, but now with the humility of someone aware of his influence, careful not to fill silence unnecessarily, allowing space for her voice to shape the moment. When they parted that night, there was no dramatic declaration, no promise made beyond honesty, yet both felt the certainty of something chosen rather than seized. Months later, Lily found herself back in the elevator late one evening, alone again, the familiar hum surrounding her, and she smiled softly at the memory of who she had been when she first whispered her truth into that space. The doors opened, and Ethan was there, waiting, not hidden this time, not silent, and as they walked out together into the quiet lobby, Lily understood that the most powerful transformation had not been in her circumstances, but in her sense of worth. What had begun as a confession born of fear had led to a partnership rooted in choice, one where love, when it arrived, did so without apology, without secrecy, and without sacrificing integrity. In the end, it was not the cancellation of meetings or the weight of a title that defined their story, but the simple courage to listen, to act justly, and to allow respect to lead the way forward.